GOP candidates elevate anti-transgender messaging as a rallying cry to Christian conservatives. Must be a date ending in Y. Chase Glenn, executive director of Alliance for Full Acceptance, stands outside the South Carolina State House before a rally against a bill banning gender-affirming care for minors. Columbia, South Carolina. Oh my gosh, South Carolina. Thousands of people in one of South Carolina's most conservative countries roared when Donald Trump promised to cut federal funding on day one for schools pushing what he called transgender insanity onto children. And I can't even believe I have to say it, but I do have to say it. Wait, hang on. And I can't even believe I have to say it, but I do have to say it. I will keep men out of women's sports. Okay. Enough of that. The former president has repeatedly mocked transgender people during his campaign, using language about gender identity that LGBTQ+ advocates say is wrong and harmful. Others in the GOP field have attacked transgender participation in athletics and proposed nationwide bans on affirming care for transgender minors. Transgender-related issues have become perhaps the biggest rallying cry to Christian conservatives, more than abortion rights or same-sex marriage. That shift worries advocates who note transgender people are already disproportionately prone to stress, depression, and suicidal behavior when forced to live as the sex they were assigned at birth. They're not sending their best, folks. They're sending Huns. They're Kumas. Yeah, I love that post. That was a great fucking post. I love that one. Republicans might be overplaying their hand as a political matter. As an ethical matter, I think it's gross, said Tim Miller, a former Republican political operative who worked as communications director for the former Florida Governor Jeb Bush's 2016 presidential campaign. Ah, Bush 3. Nah, we didn't get Bush 3. The Alliance for Full Acceptance executive director Chase Glenn, a transgender man, called it dehumanizing to have his existence politicized. Please clap. Please clap for Jeb. God, I love Jeb Bush. He's so... Okay. I would watch a movie with Jeb Bush. I'll say that. It's really disgusting that these politicians think they can use trans people, and more specifically trans youth, as a political tool to win points, he said. Many Republicans have been angered by how gender is sometimes discussed, part of a broader backlash against what conservatives see as a liberal tide in classrooms. Several people interviewed at a recent Trump rally argued children were being wrongly confronted with issues of gender identity. You gotta show me a certain video about Jeb. Okay, yeah, I'm excited to see your Jeb Bush content. We shouldn't have to think about it, said Cheryl Savage, 59, of Conway. We need to take care of our kids, right from schools all the way up. GOP-controlled state legislatures have recently moved to dictate many facets of transgender life. At least 22 states have enacted laws restricting or banning gender-affirming medical care for minors. Bills governing school pronoun usage, sports team membership, and bathroom access are back this year, as are efforts to restrict drag performances. Yeah, we just talked about the bathroom bills being back. Bush as a surname will never not be funny to me. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the whole, yeah, okay. I'm going to make my last name Shrub. Aaron Shrub. How about that? I'll run for political office. I'll be like Bush, but better. George Bush, Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, that White House was ballin'. Okay. In South Carolina, one of the few southern states without such health restrictions, the Republican-led Senate is considering a House-passed bill to ban gender-affirming care for minors. Opponents stretched the light pink, baby blue, and white stripes of the transgender flag across the State House steps this year to protest the measure. Both Trump and Nikki Haley, his last major rival heading into South Carolina's Republican primary this coming Saturday, have leaned into anti-transgender rhetoric. Haley, a former South Carolina governor and Trump's UN ambassador, frequently emphasizes to the girl dads in her home state crowds that they cannot raise strong women if there are biological boys playing in girls' sports. She has described the idea of biological boys playing in girls' sports as the women's issue of our time. Okay, that's interesting. But let me ask you this. What happens, right, when a biological girl wants to play in boys' sports? Huh? What happens then? Oh, that's not allowed either? You mean the biological girl taking testosterone needs to play with other, biological girls that aren't taking testosterone? Well, that sounds like a women's issue if I've ever heard one. Trump, at an October event in Iowa, said transgender athletes were very demeaning to women. He went on to pantomime a young weightlifter struggling to heave heavy barbells as easily as her competitors who transitioned. Especially with wrestling? Yes, we see this a lot with wrestling, actually. There's one really big case where this trans boy was forced to play against girls, like cis girls, in his wrestling team because of the anti-trans laws. And people thought it was the other way around. You know, people always, they demonize trans women that way. Trans men just absolutely suplexing the shit out of other girls because the state forced them to. Yeah, right? Right? He often repeats the act at rallies, sometimes adding that his wife, former First Lady Melania Trump, tells him his impression isn't presidential. I've got a presidential impression if I've ever heard one. And the trans mass school shooter, we were blamed for that too. Yeah, well, you know how it goes. Research into the fairness of transgender-inclusive transgender-inclusive competitions, is lacking. Virtually non-existent are studies determining whether transgender athletes hold clear advantages over cisgender participants. Trump has promised to pursue a range of other anti-transgender policies if he wins a second White House term. Proposals include banning federal money for any hospital that provides gender-affirming care to minors, ordering federal agencies to end any programs that promote sex or gender transition, and pushing Congress to ban chemical or surgical intervention for minors. That's despite endorsements from major medical groups, including the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, of transgender youth care as safe when administered properly. Well, yeah, anything is safe when you administer it properly. That's true. Transgender people make up 5 of every 1,000 adults and 14 of every 1,000 youth aged 13 to 17 in the United States, according to a June 2022 report from a UCLA law think tank that researches public policy around sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, so here's one of the things that I want to point out really quick. All right, people will take this figure, right? 5 of every 1,000 adults. That's about average for what you would consider for trans men and trans women, right? 14 of every 1,000 youth. Now that's almost 3 times as many trans people that are children rather than adults, right? So people will take this figure and extrapolate, oh, rapid onset gender dysphoria is a real thing. Look at this, right? Look, all these kids are identifying as trans and it's just a phase and you'll get over it and blah, 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 all this other stuff. Well, so if we go back a couple articles and we go back to the trans survey that we just covered at the beginning of the stream, what were some of the categories in that trans survey that people identified as, right? What were some of those categories? Well, it was trans man, right? And trans woman, of course. Yo, what? Oh my gosh. Han Lazy, thanks for the 5 gifted subs. You're so incredible. I love you so much. Thank you, thank you. I'm gonna let this play out because it's so wonderful. dun, 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 dun. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're so generous. You're so kind. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much, Canlisi. All right, so yeah, they'll take this and they'll say, "Oh, look, rapid onset gender dysphoria is a real thing. All these kids are identifying as trans, and it's just like it's a social contagion almost." Well, the categories included non-binary people, right? Non-binary was one of the biggest categories, and that's not even looking into whether these are non-binary people that are on HRT that identify as like trans, but their gender is non-binary. Nobody knows. That's non-binary is a huge tent right there, right? But they're considered trans people for the sake of the trans survey, right? And I would think that they are considered trans people for this, right? And so it makes sense that like younger people who are more like socially aware would be willing to say that like, oh, well, I'm non-binary, especially early on. Like a lot of trans people do take on that non-binary moniker before they decide whether they want to fully transition or not. Anyway, I just wanted to get that out there. I just wanted to say that bit here because I think there's a lot of confusion about the idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria and what it means for quote unquote trans youth and stuff like that. So anyway. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has repeatedly delayed a new Title IX rule that would prohibit federally funded colleges from adopting one-size-fits-all policies categorically banning transgender student athletes from playing on teams consistent with their gender identity. Such restrictions are in effect in about 20 states. I hate to do this, but we keep going back to this, like what happens to the trans men, right? When you say that, oh, well, if you're trans, you have to play sports with, whoever your biological sex is. However you came out the womb, that's who you play sports with. And so we see these trans men that were born women or born girls that are on testosterone being forced to play with cis women or cis girls. And then they get in an uproar and they blame trans women for it. When it's like, honey, you're the reason this is happening. Data from Republican elections this year and interviews with the Republican voters indicate the issue resonates with many in the GOP. According to an AP Votecast, about 3/4 of Iowa Republican caucus participants said their local public K-8 schools are teaching too much about either gender identity or sexual orientation. In New Hampshire, 7 in 10 Republican primary voters said too much is being taught about gender identity in local elementary and middle schools. Chad Connolly, the Republican National Committee's former director of faith engagement, who now runs an organization that politically mobilizes evangelical pastors, very niche audience there you've got, said many congregations are motivated by issues such as banning gender-affirming care for minors. I don't really even think that it's like teachers are like teaching people like, hey, you are trans, you should like do this, you should transition and stuff like that. I don't even think it's that. I think people really underestimate how much that, students talk to each other, how social they are. You're in a classroom of, on average, anywhere from 25 to 35 people your own age. Multiple classrooms with multiple different people. Like, you're going to talk, you're going to make friends. And a lot of this spreads socially. It's not so much that teachers are teaching it, but I think it's that students are finding this out through their social connections in school. And yeah, they do this in school, but I don't think it's necessarily the teachers that are indoctrinating children. I think it's more children participating in like social gatherings and like seeing videos on TikTok and stuff like that. Maybe these kids also spend their free time consuming a form of media which is social in nature. Whoa! I don't know any kind of media, any form, any idea of media which would be social in nature. That's a broad concept to me. That's so far foreign that I can't even comprehend it. What would they call it social media? That's so strange. That's so weird. Next thing you know, we're going to have a book of faces on the internet. Most pastors I know, they're vehemently opposed, he said. They don't believe it's healthcare to let 8 and 10-year-olds make decisions about permanently altering stuff that shouldn't be altered. Can you show me the 8 and 10-year-olds that are getting SRS, please? For the love of God, if you're going to keep doing this, if you're going to keep pounding away at this point, show me some fucking evidence, please. Like, do we have any documented cases of a 10-year-old getting bottom surgery? I don't think so. First of all, that wouldn't even be, like, good. Like, you haven't even fully developed there, so there's not, like, the material just isn't there to fully create what you're trying to create. You know, you have to go through that puberty and reach the end of your growth there for you to fully be able to invert that and do something with it, right? Like, am I wrong? I don't think I am. You know? I certainly hope nobody is getting, no prepubescent children are getting SRS. As a trans person, I don't think that's necessary. I think that is actually harmful to the ultimate goal of somebody who wants SRS. Depth is such an important factor for so many people. And I've known trans women, right, who took their aftercare way less seriously than they should have. And as a result, they don't have the depth that they were looking for, that they were promised. They don't have that depth because they took their aftercare less seriously than they should have. There do not seem to be any cases of prepubescents getting SRS. Well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because there's not really a whole lot of material to work there with, you know? There are, however, many cases of intersex babies getting this kind of surgery. And that makes sense too. No one talks about that. Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. And intersex falls under the category of trans. They fall under that trans umbrella. Guidelines from leading authorities on gender-affirming medical care say surgery generally should be reserved for adults, with exceptions for older teenagers who meet certain criteria. Other treatments, such as puberty blockers, are not considered irreversible. Yeah. This is the important part right here. Treatments such as puberty blockers are not considered irreversible. Tim Carter, 55, who described himself as Christian and runs an addiction recovery business, attended Trump's recent rally in Conway. He and others said they agreed with Trump on banning transgender women from joining women's sports, an opinion shaped in part by their faith. Followers of Christ love all people, Carter said, but there are some things you just can't go over on. Circumcision is chill, though. Jesus says to do something irreversible, then that's just how it is. Yeah, true. Even proper HRT isn't as irreversible as people think. Yeah. I mean, I would still have, like, breast buds if I stopped taking estrogen. They'd probably get smaller. I would start growing facial hair more. Puberty blockers only have certain risks associated with them depending on the Tanner stage, and, of course, the way it's administered. I literally have a detransitioner friend who mistook himself for a trans woman because he hated his circumcised penis so much. Yeah, and that's the other thing, is if we're talking about genital mutilation, right, what we should be looking at first is circumcision. When you start bringing that to our children in schools, you've crossed the line, he said. We need to raise our children, not others. Jewish silence. My God, Mandy. Transgender access to sports, bathrooms, and healthcare became the new keystone issue for the religious right after the Supreme Court approved same-sex marriage, said Jamie Taylor, a University of Toledo professor of political science who researches policies related to LGBTQ+ rights. The High Court also overturned a federally guaranteed right to abortion 2 years ago, delivering a long-sought victory for conservatives but opening a wedge that Democrats have successfully centered in campaigns since. Republicans have been divided on whether to push for a national abortion ban, with Trump declining to publicly endorse the idea. Isn't it so funny that Republicans are still beholden to Trump? Like, he's not even president anymore. He hasn't been for like 3 years. And they're still just like, oh, wait, I gotta wait for Trump to say something about it before I can decide whether I want to support this or not. Something I've heard and I think should be widely adopted is compounded topical testosterone so that puberty occurs there and only there. Yeah, okay. Sure. I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't know too much about topical ointments or whatever. Between 2015 and 2020, party identification and religious attendance became much more predictive of someone's opinions on transgender-related issues, according to research from Taylor and her colleagues. They found that those who frequently go to religious services and align with Republicans are less likely to support inclusive restroom access. You don't want to talk about abortion right now if you're a Republican, Taylor said, but you can get away with it more with trans issues, and you're throwing a bone to the same people. Yeah, that's true. Mascono, a 60-year-old political agnostic, said the Republican messaging on transgender issues does not resonate with him at all. In the presidential contest, he reluctantly leans Biden, but remains open to supporting Haley, whose rally he attended recently in Daniel Island, South Carolina. Kono is more concerned about the economy, national security, and democracy. While Republican lawmakers in his state are moving to restrict transgender youth's healthcare access, he described the topic as an anecdotal issue that sells bumper stickers. You might as well say ban calculus in kindergarten, Kono said. That's a good fucking quote! I love that quote! That's a really, really good quote. Ban calculus in kindergarten. So true. Abortion and transition ultimately both are about body autonomy, which they don't believe in. Wow, amazing. It's almost like they're consistent with their beliefs when they're spreading hate. And only when they're spreading hate. I met a Christian conservative trans friend who's a Nikki Haley supporter. I'm so sorry. Sounds like such a burden.